Okay, great. And we live.
Yes.
And this afternoon, we're having a chat about work and the future of work and business and so forth. And my guest is Guy Whitcroft, a well known entity in the IT industry, I suppose, in Africa, not, if not internationally, um, with close to, what's it, 5 decades
Yeah.
worth of
Frightening.
experience. it's it's terrible. I said to my wife the other day, we talked about, yeah, we had some property in a unit a while ago, and eventually I just sold it because of politics. And she said, just imagine the old people that that used to annoy us, we them now.
Yes.
uh, so tell me, I mean, obviously couldn't handle sitting at home and doing nothing. So how did business fitness come about, and what is it about?
Right. So, as you said, nearly 5 decades since my first job, which, let me just wind back a little bit. It was a computer operator, because in those days you needed people to push the buttons on the computers to make them do things. They didn't have
Yeah,
operating systems. So that's how I started. And I've been through the technical ranks. I've been through the sales and marketing ranks, and I've spent nearly 30 years on boards. Um, so, but I am now at a point where, um, my age gets in the way, and I've still got more energy than most 40-year-olds I know. And so I started doing some consulting and coaching to businesses, but found that really the way forward is going to be increasingly online. So a one-to-many rather than a one-to-one
yeah,
kind of relationship. And obviously there will be some one-to-one clients, but in the main there'll be one-to-many. And so I've developed my first course for owners and directors of companies, called Powerful Company Directorship. And that's really trying to enable particularly SMEs to get a solid grounding of business fundamentals, understand what they need to be watching out for, because the Companies Act can be a pretty scary place to be on the wrong side of if you haven't been paying attention, or you're just not familiar with it.
yeah,
Direct are jointly and severally liable for any and all losses, damages, and pretty well anything else suffered by anyone in connection with their business if they haven't been able to show that they've been doing the right things. So taking them through things like that, but then building on that with how to run an effective board, because a board actually is one of the most underutilized potential competitive advantages that a business can have. A well-structured board is enormously important. The board, after all, is responsible for overseeing the business, for the governance. And governance, I know, is often a word that people think only applies to large corporates, but actually applies to any registered business. But the board sets the strategy. The board appoints the CEO. The board needs to make sure that things are being done properly, because ultimately it's the board members, and you don't just have to have the title director in your name. You could be a non-exec director. You could be a board committee member. You could even be what's called a prescribed officer, which is somebody who runs a significant part of the business and isn't on the board, but they all are answerable under the Companies Act to the same things that directors are. And it was just taking people through that. So I'm doing that at the moment, and growing those courses. So the next one I'm working on is Powerful Company Leadership, which will be about leading companies. So now moving from the board into the if you like, executive management, the CEO, COO, CFO kind of thing, and really helping people understand how to run companies effectively. Because over the years, I've learnt through a lot of school fees, I think the basics of and running companies. I've built one to 100 times the size when I joined in terms of top line, and about 200 times in bottom line. And I've turned around others. I've bought and sold a couple. I've been through the mill of different sized businesses, from pretty small to regional sort of powerhouses.
Okay, but it goes beyond just training. So
Yeah,
I suppose you
coaching, consulting, mentoring,
yeah.
The whole gamut. I mean, I've got this experience, and I want to keep busy, and I want to keep occupied and keep out of my wife's hair. So yes, it's getting in there, and I've always enjoyed being in business. I love the cut and thrust of business.
Yeah.
I'm not and sitting on the stoep with a brandy and a pipe and watching the sun move across the sky. That's not me. I've got to be active.
Yeah. Yeah, and I sometimes say to people, experience is a wonderful thing, because you don't only learn what to do, but also what not to do.
Yeah.
So you don't have to pay those school fees. Yeah, somebody else has learned it on your behalf, and that's just as valuable.
There's a lovely Arab saying that all sunshine makes a desert, and essentially what they're meaning is you need the other stuff too for fertile ground. It's no good just having all the good times. You should learn from your mistakes.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, giving advice to any company, it doesn't have to be a new company or a startup or whatever, today has to deal with, I suppose, quite a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah.
Because of all of this turbulent times that we're in. What do you think about the future of business? How do you think things are going to change or going to stay the same? What are things that people need to look out for?
Well, I think it's pretty much more of the same in many ways. I mean, it's the velocity that keeps increasing. I've been watching a TV series over some time on the Roman Empire, and it's very interesting. I mean, Caesar, for example, spent years to fight a war because things just took a long time. It took him 2 years to catch up with Pompey, and it took him another year to beat them, and so on. And so things took a long time. Nowadays, everything happens that much quicker. Going back to the early days when I first started work, a company only really found out what it had done after the end of its financial year. Whereas nowadays, you've got real-time data. You have to be able to move more quickly because everything is moving quicker. And typically the margins are smaller across business. And so the velocity of moving that money through is what makes the business successful or not. And so it really is about optimizing structures and processes, procedures, people to make sure that you are as lean as practical, whilst giving your customers a really great experience, because those are the sort of two opposing forces to a large extent. So, there's increasing use of artificial intelligence. Will it replace everything? I don't think it can. It'll replace a lot of the repetitive functions because that's easy to do. When it comes on to the more creative side of things, and I'm not talking about creative accounting in a negative way here, because there is some of that goes around, as we've seen. But I'm talking about interpersonal interactions. I mean, one of the frustrations I think many of us feel is the need sometimes to be able to speak to a person. There are all these chatbots around, and you get onto them, but they're awful, most of them. They never give you the answers to the things you need. And a couple of my service providers, I have ongoing fights with them over chatbots and saying, well, sometimes I need to talk to a person because the chat box doesn't understand the issue I'm having. So I think, as I say, that there's a place for AI for a lot of the mundane, but I think what we'll see over the years ahead is, while there will be a greater use of it to handle a lot of repetitive stuff, I think there's going to be an increasing need for people to be reskilled out of the sort of repetitive things into basically being able to think on their feet and provide real-time response to particular issues. And I think that's going to be the competitive advantage, is companies that can react to individual issues rather than putting you in bucket A or bucket B or whatever it is.
Yeah. And you used an interesting word, reskill. And if traditionally, if you spoke to a CEO or whatever about reskilling, they would all tell you that they do reskill, but the reskilling focus just on another repetitive job.
Yeah.
And today I suppose we have to come up with a better and a more intelligent way of thinking about reskilling. So if that sort of brings us to the logical next question is, what will a good employee look like in future? What are the skills and capabilities that would prepare somebody for the next 10, 15, 20 years?
Right. So I think, I mean, there are many parts to a good employee, and frankly to a good employer as well.
Yes.
And the elements change depending on the state of development of the company. The skills required in a startup are very different to those required in a mid-sized company, which is scaling quickly, and very different again to those required in a multinational corporate. You need different skill sets at different at different stages of company growth. The company needs different skills from its people. The people obviously need to have different innate skills to fit in with that, because culture becomes an important facet for happy employment. Something like 45% of people leave jobs because they are battling with the culture one way or another. And that's covered under a range of different things, but ultimately it boils down to culture. So, but overall, as I think it's important to understand a couple of things. Firstly, when you and I started working, our parents had come from a generation where they joined a company and were with them for life, and they got the gold watch on their retirement date, and that was it. During the course of our employment, it's changed. So we went in almost with that expectation, but obviously now we realize that we live in a very much more dynamic world. And in fact, the generation Z coming through now will have 10, 20 companies that they'll work for through the course of their working life, because they will evolve, the companies will evolve, and it's going to be a case of moving chairs around all the time, just to keep both employer and employee relevant, and that's not a bad thing. So what people will need to do is constantly, educate themselves. Education isn't something that stops at the end of school or university. You need to educate yourself throughout life. I I continue to learn on a daily basis. I learned about how to develop a website this year. 10 years ago, well, probably no, 15 years ago now, I learned to fly a plane. I got a pilot's license. Some people might think that's quite late to do that, but that was when I had the time and the frankly the money to be able to do that. 20 years ago, I took a field guide course, so I'm qualified to wear khaki and take people through the bush. Well, I was then. I've lost a lot of it now. I'd have to brush up on it. But you know, and you might think, well, what have they got to do with anything? And they're actually very interesting because you can apply bits from all these different things. I mean, piloting is planning, pure and simple planning, and planning for eventualities. And that's really useful when you're developing strategy, because you need to think what might happen. And obviously, there will still be things coming out of left field. But if you are of a frame of mind that is looking for patterns, looking for things, you're going to, and pattern recognition is a really strong leadership skill. So you're going to be able to hopefully prepare for things before they occur. And certainly when the unexpected does occur, because you have so many options within your field of planning, you're going to be able to react more quickly to even the unknowns, because you have those options. And the same goes for people. You need to be able to look at things and figure out how to look at them in different ways. Case in point is companies who employ non-executive directors. The tradition was a non-executive director would come from the same industry and basically just be somebody with that industry experience sitting on the board, giving another set of experience. But companies now recognize that a non-exec director, the best non-exec directors, come from other industries, because then they're bringing in completely different points of view. They don't have the same set of industry standard knowledge. All chairs are made from pine, for argument's sake, to use a random example. They'll come in and say, well, have we thought about recycling plastic and using that to build the skeleton of the chair, or a different type of wood, or some other material completely? And asking those questions rather than just going down the, well, this was what my father and my grandfather and my great-grandfather did kind of route, which too often happens in particularly in older industries.
Yeah, I was during this week, I was actually reminded, I don't know if you can remember the old John Cleese business videos.
Oh, yeah.
They were absolutely brilliant. And there was this little snippet from one of them with him sitting at a shrink and saying, I just don't know. I mean, we go around the table with the weekly meeting and everybody just says, they've got nothing to say. So the shrink said to him, but so why do you have the weekly meeting? He says, but it's the weekly meeting.
So, and yes, I mean, absolutely. One of the companies I did some work with had a full schedule for the execs of weekly meetings and monthly meetings and fortnightly meetings. And they just filled up time, and the execs found they didn't have time to do the important stuff. And it's too often we get dragged down, and it's urgent versus important when we're looking at what to do. And we get dragged down the urgent route and we leave the important. And that's a fundamental problem. One of the pieces I wrote about the other week, do you own your business, or does your business own you? And for too many people, the business owns them. It takes all their time, and they don't actually get to sit and work on their business because they're in it all the time, sort of fighting the fires and just involved in the minutiae of the business. And they don't have time to do anything else and develop the business, which means, frankly, they can never retire from it or sell it because they are too integral to the business.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm actually just lifting my eyebrows because, to a large extent, that's what my business is also. There's so much of, I suppose, me invested in the business that without it, there's, I wouldn't say no value, but certainly far amount less value, which is, I suppose, not the brightest thing to do. If you talk to people, what are you talked about skills and capabilities and so forth. What are the skills and capabilities that people in general tell you that's in short supply? And that's now across the industry.
I mean, obviously, there are the sort of the hard skills. Technology understanding, I think, is in short supply in a lot of businesses. Just trying to figure out how things work, how they could work, that kind of stuff. But I think it's the skills that I think need to be developed a lot more in business are the soft skills, apart from interpersonal ones. The old Jack Welch days of remove the bottom 10% of your company performers, regardless of anything else. You just draw a line and say 10% goes. You can't manage like that anymore. You can't lead like that anymore. You've got to understand where people are and where they're coming from and how you can make them more effective. Because often those poor performers are not poor performers because they are inherently bad performers. They just have bad management. And actually, they can become star performers with a little bit of attention. So that sort of interpersonal skill is important. HP, funnily enough, developed something 60, 70 years ago, MBWA, management by wandering around. And I think that's a really important skill because, if you lock yourself in the corner office all day, don't see your team, don't see your customers, don't see your suppliers, your business will fail. The more time you spend, your job as a leader is to interact with all of those levels. So talk to your people, talk to your customers at all levels, talk to your suppliers at all levels, understand how they see your business, because if you don't know what the problems are, you can't solve them. So I think, that's a really important skill. The other one, I talked about pattern recognition, but it's the whole creativity thing, just in terms of being able to apply something to another situation, and being, having that ability not just to keep doing something you've read about, but figure out how something else that might be completely, coming out of left field can be applied to a current situation.
Yeah.
And don't try and be perfect. If you wait for perfection, then you're going to miss the bus. To mangle a whole bunch of metaphors, but you really need to get out there, take action, and move. And you can change direction more easily than you can start from behind and try and catch up.
Yeah, absolutely. And what can organizations do to better facilitate the learning or the acquisition of these types of skills and capabilities?
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to employment. In the first place, as the company grows, what you want to do is bring in a diverse set of backgrounds and things, because that ultimately gives you a much richer mix of it's the different experiences and skills that people bring to a business that give you this very rich mix to draw on. If you've only ever done things one way and all your people have only ever done things one way, then you're not going to figure out how to respond to a competitor who starts doing things differently. Whereas if you have this diverse range of experiences, skills, backgrounds, I mean, you know, doing the field guiding course was fascinating. Yes, I learned about, you know, everything from geology and fauna and flora, but it was also learning about how the different things live. And you can apply that and see that, you know, people might think a termite and an ant are the same thing. They have very, very different life structures. They fill a similar gap in the ecosystem, but have come from, you know, slightly different backgrounds, and they do that. And the same must apply to people in a company, that you want this range of skills, and the company needs to encourage this. I've, for 25 years, encouraged things like suggestions boxes. Now that sounds pretty old-fashioned. So we took it kicking and screaming into the late 20th century and subsequently the 21st century with electronic ones. But it's the people at all levels who really understand what their role is and where their bottlenecks are and how to improve things, what could be done differently, better, and so on and so forth. That's where you get an enormous amount of input. And yes, you get silly ones that say we'd like 5 different types of coffee to choose from, or whatever it is. But actually, you get some really useful skills, ideas coming through from people at all levels about how to do things better, and you know, reward those people for doing that in different ways, and do it publicly. That's the other thing. Always reward people publicly, because that just builds a much stronger team.
Okay. And do you think, I mean, it's wonderful to have a diverse team, but if the diverse team don't have the opportunity to share, then I suppose that's also less valuable. Yeah. So how do you create those opportunities where we can actually talk about things that's beyond the daily meeting?
Well, there are a variety of ways you can do it. You know, I've done team breakfasts where I would once a week have an early session, so starting at, you know, from 7:30 to 8:30 for argument's sake, with people drawn randomly out of a hat, and have a breakfast session with them. And you know, I was CEO. The people from all parts of the company, as I say, entirely random, and no, there was nothing off the table in terms of questions. And we used to have some amazing discussions there. And it was a mix of people from all different departments and different levels. And it just fosters a spirit. As you know, we had monthly communication sessions where we would talk about what the company has achieved, how we're performing against targets, what we're doing well, what we're doing badly. That's the place that we would recognize the great suggestions and the overachievers in different departments, not just sales. Too often companies acknowledge the top sales performers, but there are a whole host of other people helping those sales performers actually deliver the goods, because getting the signature is only part of the job. You've got to actually conclude the sale and get paid. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there supporting them, and so you always look for people who have gone the extra mile, as it were, in all different areas of the company. But you bring everyone together and you have an informal session. Stand around, talk to people. Where you've got remote branches, you video link them, and the executives will take it in turns to visit different branches for these sessions, so that they have physical presence there as well.
Okay.
Not all together, you know, one here, one there, and so on and so forth. But that kind of thing is really important. You need people to feel that it is not head office versus the branches or anything like that.
Sorry, I've got a little Not a little, a 13-year-old pointer daughter that's scratching on my door. I just want to quickly SMS my wife and ask her to come and fetch her. She insists she wants to be here now.
Well, maybe she can contribute.
Yeah, with the amount of wires around me now, maybe not. Yeah, sorry for that. Yeah, and we. What about how do you think preparing somebody for a management or a leadership job? I don't even want to say needs to be different because, quite frankly, I don't think I've ever been prepared for any of those jobs. I
No.
was just sort of thrown into them. What does the Peter principle say? You
Yes.
get promoted to your highest level of incompetence, eh? But what can organizations do to make sure that we've got better managers and better leaders? Because you said a little bit earlier, quite often a bad performer is because of a bad manager.
Yes.
Yeah.
So and again, it really comes down to management, and the leadership needs to set the tone for the business, but they need to manage the managers, and make sure that things are being done in the right way. I think too often what happens is that an HR department is created in a smaller business as it grows. They create an HR department, and the managers hand off people management to HR, and that's wrong, because nobody would understand the roles being performed by individuals in a team better than the manager or supervisor of that team. They're the ones that need to manage the individuals in that team. They can see where the holes are, what's working, what's not working, and to put in place performance plans and growth plans for people. Understand, not everybody wants to be the CEO. A lot of people think it might be nice because you might get a bigger car and a bigger house, not necessarily understanding that comes with a whole lot of other issues. But a lot of people are very happy at a certain level. They want to get to a certain level to give them a certain level of responsibility, lifestyle, and so on. And that's what they will aspire to. So don't try and push people beyond their comfort zones in terms of promotion too quickly. I think that's a mistake, because people then flame out if not careful. The other thing companies often do wrong is they say, right, my best salesperson is Fred or Sue or whoever it is. I'm going to make them the sales manager. The best salesperson is very seldom a good sales manager.
Yeah.
And the best salespeople actually often earn more than the top execs in the company anyway, particularly in a good year. So, not being the sales manager or the sales director is not necessarily a bad thing in terms of earnings. And the top salespeople need to be really carefully managed and nourished, if you like, so that they recognize that having the title sales director might not suit them. And yes, there are the exceptions where the top salesperson actually is a very good sales director, but by and large, that's not the case. And so you've got to, and the managers at each level have to really understand what the capabilities and the desires of the different people in their team are, as well as the needs, because desire and need are two different things, and make the best of people in those ways to help develop them. And sometimes, you'll sit down with somebody and they'll talk about something. They won't, you will, talking to them, realize that they've got some other skills that they might want to cross train on or take those skills to a different department, because that's actually when their eyes light up when you're talking to them about that. And so you've got them in the warehouse, whereas actually they want to be a computer programmer because they've taught themselves to program. And that's really what gets them going. That's what they do all night long on their own time. And you might be better advised to move them across.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually it's sad that, and strangely enough, it's not the case in the northern Germanic countries, that that status also always goes together with people management and size of teams and salaries. So but it's difficult to I don't know, what do you do if you've got an engineer that's a really, really good engineer? How do you keep them? If it would be a disaster to make them a manager, and it. I mean, I've promoted people in my career that I pretty much I did it because I didn't want to lose them, but I knew it's not going to end well.
Well, and I sometimes you have to have those difficult conversations where you speak to somebody and say, look, I know you want to be a manager. I think your skill set is better suited to, this type of problem solving in the case of an engineer, rather than managing people, which comes with a whole lot of different issues. And it's really a question of having those conversations with people, understanding that people often will leave your business. You seldom will keep everyone forever. And sometimes that's a good thing because the business evolves. You need fresh blood, as they say. Let people go graciously. I've encouraged people to leave before, not because I've wanted them to go, but because I can see that the next step in their growth path needs to be somewhere else. And so you encourage them to go, and sometimes they come back later. And sometimes they come back realizing they made a terrible mistake because you said to them, look, I don't think, you should be engineering manager, because what you really enjoy is this problem solving and developing these new things yourself and all of that intellectual stuff. Whereas being a manager, it comes with a whole lot of other things which I don't think you'd enjoy. Goes off to be an engineering manager, realizes it's a terrible mistake, doesn't do well in that job, isn't happy, comes back to you as a senior engineer again. These things happen. Sometimes you're wrong and they flourish, but more often than not, if you've been doing a good job leading this particular team, you understand the skills, but have that conversation. And if they decide to leave, wish them well and mean it.
Okay.
Always have succession plans in place. That's the other key thing. And all of this stuff comes from the board down. The board needs to have the annual performance review of the directors, including the CEO, who in turn have performance reviews of their people. And this isn't a wag the finger performance review, because a performance review is not just looking at how well or badly you've done with the key performance indicators, the KPIs that have been set for you, but also in terms of the softer areas, the other areas. What are you doing in terms of your own development? Where can the business assist you with your further development? What is it you want to do? How's that going to help the business? Because it may or it may not. So we've got to have a discussion about that sort of thing. So it comes from the top down. It's not a bottom up approach. It's a top down, and it's got to be pushed all the way down. It's, this is how we do it in this business. And that's really important.
Can we disconnect, or I suppose we can, but the question is how, seniority, productivity, and pay?
I think it often is. As I said, the top salespeople in many companies earn more than the executive suite.
Yeah, but in sales, I know and understand that, and that always happens. But
Yeah.
what about in engineering? It's not that easy to do it there. And if you want to keep somebody then there, what can we do to? I don't have an answer. I mean,
Hmm.
I'm just
Well,
curious about
I
this.
I mean, one's also got to look at the value of the role to the business.
Yeah,
So, what happens to the business if you don't have this particular role anymore? In other words, that person leaves and you can't find anyone else um, with the appropriate skill set at that salary level, for argument's sake. Is it because you are underpaying for the role, or is it because you undervalue the role? Um, or is it simply that the role you've set the skills bar too high, and that actually you can operate with a redefined job description and still achieve what you need for the business? So there are different dimensions to look at to make sure. But ultimately, you know, you've got to look at what the value of a role is to the business, and are you paying commensurately with that value?
yeah.
If that makes
So,
sense.
do you think businesses do that though? Um,
I
I
think
like this concept of evaluating the value of the role. Um, it's something that I haven't thought of, in that terms before. But do businesses do that?
increasingly, I believe they do. Um, there are a lot, I guess, that don't, but then they are the ones that will constantly fall short, because what will happen is they won't be able to keep people in those roles because they're not paying enough. So then they'll have to settle for second or third or fourth or whatever best. And the output from that role will suffer, which ultimately will affect the company. So
Yeah,
you've got to understand what the role is, what it should be, because the two things don't necessarily tie up. You might say, well, I need a senior graphic designer to be able to do really fancy graphics for my company, but I can only afford 20,000 rands a month, for argument's sake. You're not going to get a senior graphic designer for that. But do you need one, and why? Or
yeah.
is it an outsource role that you pay piecemeal for stuff, and you find you're paying 20,000 a month for the graphics work that's being done?
Hello. I lost you.
We seem to
Okay.
lost each
Yeah,
other there.
you're back. That's strange. Yeah, I'm just thinking in the back of my head, the quantifying value for different roles can, I suppose, be very complex.
Yes.
Um, and how would one do that? So that's a really interesting, um, maybe a future article
Yeah.
for you to explore.
Well, it would have to be
Um,
a series, I suspect, but touch
yeah,
on it. But
quantifying the value of roles, that would be really an interesting conversation.
yeah, but
Yeah,
it is, and I think you're seeing it now. I mean, you're seeing look at how Silicon Valley changed the pay scales, if you like, for techies,
mm,
because they saw the value, they recognized the value. You could argue perhaps some have now been overpaid. Certainly, property prices, I understand, are a big problem there, simply because there is so
yeah,
much money sloshing around. But so I think companies are starting to recognize this, and certainly whenever there is a disconnect between a skills requirement at a certain level and a skills availability at that level, then obviously the value becomes more recognizable. So I think, you know, if you're in a crowded field, then it becomes more difficult to have your skills recognized.
Yeah, so the market sort of determines it for you.
Yeah.
You don't really have a choice. Yeah, I suppose. Um, okay, so that's employees. Let's turn a little bit to the conversation towards customers.
Mhm.
Is there such a thing as an ideal customer?
Oh yeah. And that ideal customer depends very much on your on your on your business, your target markets, and so on and so forth. So, and frankly, you should have. It's sometimes referred to as an ideal customer avatar. You want to have a very clear picture, even draw a picture of your ideal customer for particular products, market segments, services, and so on, so that you understand how to target. Because when all's said and done, you are selling your product or service to this ideal customer. You want to know what they look like, what their experience is, and therefore how to address them so that they are receptive to your product or service. And if they're not receptive to it, are you addressing the wrong customer, or do you have a bad product? It's going to be one or the other, and
Yeah,
you've got to work that out. So you need to drill down and figure out who your ideal customers are. The other thing I think a lot of companies lose sight of, it's a very simple concept, and that is lifetime value of customer.
yeah,
You know, if you eat out, for argument's sake, once a fortnight, and you spend, I don't know, for two of you, 500 Rand in round figures, eating out once a fortnight, right? That's 26 times a year. That's 13,000 Rands a year that you're
yeah,
spending on food. Now, you know, how many restaurants would like to capture that 13,000 times 10 years that you're going to be living in a place and going back to that restaurant? That's a lot of money. 130,000 is the lifetime value, plus, of course, inflation costs and things. But in current monetary terms, you're looking
yes,
at that sort of spend. That's a lot of money. And they're going to argue with you over a 50 Rand dessert that they charged you for that you didn't have or you didn't like and you sent back. And so you'll never go there again. So for 50 Rand, they're throwing away 130,000 Rand. This sort of thing really companies need to understand. I mean, my
yeah,
my favorite restaurant, well, the chef and his team, we've been eating there since 2004 was the first time we came across them.
okay,
And we have enjoyed their food so much that we've moved as they've changed restaurants. Um, but even when we were in Dubai, we'd come back twice a year and spend a long weekend making sure we could have at least 3 meals over the long weekend with them twice a year. When we were in England, it was the same thing. Now we're living here, it's obviously that much easier. And you know, so the lifetime value in terms of what we've spent with them is considerable. And
yeah,
but and it's a real thing. I had another restaurant that um, we enjoyed for some years, and then we had a really poor experience where it was a steak that we ordered, and the steak was horribly undercooked. I mean, we had ordered it medium rare to medium rare, and it was blue and cold. I think they'd just put it on the past raw somehow and had the infrared light, you know, heated up
yeah,
slightly on the outside, and we sent it back. And they sent out another one, which took 15 minutes, by which time I'd finished my steak because this was my wife's one that was so badly done. And the piece of meat that came to her was awful. It was, you know, it was cooked the right way, but the meat itself was terrible. It was full of gristle and stuff. I don't know where they'd found it. So we sent that back and we've never been back since.
Yeah.
Because they just handled it really badly. And, things like that are important. So it's easy in a restaurant setting because you get immediate feedback, but you need to apply that in your business. And this is why it's so important that the CEO, as well as other executives and, throughout the business, go and talk to customers and really understand what they're experiencing, what they're doing well, what they're doing badly, what the customers would like to see, and what they would like you to stop doing. All basic things to ask. And it's amazing what comes out of that set of questions sometimes.
Yeah. I quite often say to customers, so what is it that your customer value? And most people are very quick to actually give you an answer. And if you ask them, how do you know? The answer invariably is not because I asked the customer.
Yes, I designed it. Yeah,
I designed it so that, or the salesperson said that, or we got really good feedback from the support team. Yeah, instead of actually just talking to people. And it's amazing for me how little senior people in organizations actually time they spend with customers, which is their business.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I've always made a point of seeing at least 5 customers a week, and not just the big ones. Again, they get picked randomly out of a hat. Obviously, you see the big ones on a regular basis, but pick out others randomly, and you go and see them, and it's incredible what you find out. There's a mystery shopper concept as well. Now, obviously, as the CEO, you can't be your own mystery shopper because you phone in, everyone on the switchboard or wherever it is knows your voice. So you can't be a mystery shopper, but certainly go and employ a couple and ask them for personal feedback. Because again, one of the things that happens, I think sometimes for the right reasons and sometimes frankly for the wrong reasons, is that the executive team is shielded from what's really going on.
Yeah.
And that's a mistake. Now, it might be that you don't want to upset them because things are going badly and you're going to fix it, kind of thing. But actually, that's not a good idea because often it spirals out of control. As CEO, I've always wanted to know the bad stuff because then at least if I'm aware of it, firstly, I can maybe help fix it. I don't necessarily have all the answers, but sometimes I can bring a different perspective. I can certainly accelerate the fixing process one way or another. And I'm also forearmed so that when an irate customer gets hold of me, I know what the problem is rather than, that, oh dear, I wasn't aware of that. I'll need to go and find out and come back to you. Far better to say, I'm aware of that. This is what we're doing. This is how we're fixing it. Very sorry. Give us a few more days or whatever it is.
Or even phoning the customer and saying, I'm aware of it and we're busy fixing it.
Well, I'm talking about a systemic problem rather than a one-on-one problem. A one-on-one, you want to preempt and get on top of it.
And I think part of the reason it happens is this issue of fear and lack of trust. And I've worked in a number of environments where, thinking back about it, it wasn't really a good place to be. And so what can a leader of an organization do to help people to be open and honest about things, and not hide things that could be harmful to the customer, to the organization?
Well, and again, it's a trickle down from board level all the way down. Everyone makes mistakes, right? We've got to understand that we make mistakes. The big thing is to learn from them. If somebody is making the same mistake time after time after time after time, then clearly serious disciplinary action needs to be taken because they're not learning. But everyone makes mistakes. What you've got to do is, when somebody makes a mistake for the first time, you've got to sit them down and say, right, this is what went wrong. You understand that, yes. What would you do differently next time? Take them through the process, help them understand why it was a mistake, and that you acknowledge it and they acknowledge it, and it's going to be different. You've got to have that approach so that people understand that, it's okay to make a mistake as long as you learn from it, and don't keep repeating it. It's that repetition is bad.
Yeah. And quite often it's just the opposite. Whenever something goes wrong, there's always this witch hunt and somebody looking for somebody to blame.
Yeah.
Which, long term is detrimental to the organization. Yeah. So tell me a little bit, because we close on an hour now. So the last little bit, I'm going to zoom in a little bit on you. Tell me a little bit about your journey. I know you said to me that you're a Wenwi. I hope you don't get offended by that. But after that, what was the life of Guy like? So.
Well, I mean, it's been. I suppose the grand irony is I grew up on a farm without electricity, and yet my life has been in IT, which generally doesn't function well without electricity. Despite Eskom's best efforts to prove otherwise. But we need electricity, and I fell into it really by accident. At school, did an aptitude test, which was no help at all because it said I could do whatever I wanted, which wasn't giving me direction. And somebody suggested taking a computer aptitude test, which I did and passed. So I decided, well, then I have to do this. It was a very demotivating. It was my first serious demotivational corporate experience. I was at school last year. At school, went into it was ICL in those days. They ran these aptitude tests up in what was then Salisbury, now Harare, and walked in, and there were about 30 people, different ages and things in there. So a bit of excitement for me going up to the capital city, which had been an overnight train journey, and so then going in and sitting down, this lady came in and introduced herself and said, right, there are 30 of you here. You're writing this programming aptitude test. I don't expect anyone to pass because only 1 in 1,000 people do, but good luck anyway. Sure. So with that little bit of motivation, I wrote the test and got a call 3 weeks later to say I'd passed. So that told me I had to be in computers because clearly I had no choice.
Well, it also told you what you were 1 in 1,000, yes?
Yeah, well, whether that was correct, I don't know. Whether that was a number in those days or what the story was. I mean, this is, an awful long time ago. This was middle of 1972 when I wrote the test. So, 49 years ago. And things have changed since then. So, and as I say, I've been allied to the industry one way or another ever since. So it's been a fascinating journey. I've worked obviously in Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, for a few years, and worked then in the UK, and then to South Africa for 30 years, Dubai for a few years, back to England for a few years, and back to South Africa in 2014. And here I am in Cape Town, loving it.
And okay, I'm not going to ask you what you love about Cape Town. Cape Town. Let me ask you, what do you miss about Joburg?
Trying to think of something. Thunderstorms, actually. I used to love the thunderstorms up there. I mean, we had lovely property, lots of trees, things like that. it was a very green, restful space, the house, around the house. But we live up the hill in Hout Bay. We look over the ocean. So also trees, very, very restful, very quiet, because that's important to me is the peace and quiet, of my home surroundings. But yeah, I guess the business, to some extent, I miss the business environment in Joburg because that was always, there's a lot happening. It's a very busy place.
Yeah.
So I miss that too, as well as the thunderstorms.
But there's nothing like a high-felt thunderstorm, hey? It's
nothing.
just, man, yeah. Yeah. If there's, and I know if somebody asks me this, I'll tell them nothing. Is there one thing in your life that you would have done differently? Just one.
I can't think of anything, to be honest. It's not over yet, that's for sure. Well, not in my plans. Got a long way to go. But yeah, would I have done things? I can't think of anything that I'd have done differently. I mean, I've made mistakes along the way, I guess, but I've learned from them. And you are ultimately the sum of your experiences. So if I hadn't made a mistake in joining a company at some point or something like that, then I wouldn't have had that bit of experience, which actually would have stood me well for a future role. So there would have been a ripple effect. It's that butterfly flapping its wings in the Amazon affecting the weather across the Atlantic, sort of thing.
Pick 3 things that stands out in your business life.
In what context?
In terms of who you are today. 3 things that contributed into.
Well, I think growing up in a house that had a lot of books, and going to a school, a government school, but encouraged you to learn and to read. So I've always been an avid reader, an avid learner. So I think that first and foremost. I think, and everything interests me. I have a very wide range of interests, which is sometimes, I suppose, a bit of a distraction as well. Sometimes because I can get pulled away by something in one or other direction because I just find everything so interesting. I think certainly joining Tarsus, when I was approached to join Tarsus and help them get Compact, and that's my longest unbroken. And I joined Tarsus as a director, helped them get Compact, and then became CEO a few years after that, and was CEO there for 10 years or so. When I joined the company, it was a small niche distribution business. When I left, it was the region's largest and most profitable. And I like to think I had something to do with that. And that was, I learned a lot there. That was a lot of, there were challenges. There were huge challenges at different times. The Rand crash in 2001, the dot bomb in 2000, and so on. But we had a lot of fun as well. And it was a great place to be. And so I guess that gave me the solid grounding. I mean, I suppose a lot of it I learned on the job, but the solid grounding in leadership and so on. So that's really important. And then I think, spending time overseas. So obviously I traveled a lot through my career, but actually living in Dubai, living in the UK, as well as then making the choice to come back here. It's been very, very interesting. Just exposure to the different cultures and the different ways of doing things, and I think that's also been very valuable. I'd certainly encourage. I've always enjoyed travel, and I would encourage people to travel when they get the opportunity, because it is, the world is a fascinating place.
You say you're an avid reader. What do you read?
Oh, what don't I read? No, I mean, I've got loads of business books. I typically read a lot of those in summary form, because otherwise I'd never get through them. I read, magazines from, nature, flying, because those are still great interests of mine, IT, various countries, things like that. I subscribe to a couple of newspapers, overseas ones generally. I read the local online press. I read novels, because I think it's important as well to read novels from time to time. So I've normally got 3 or 4 different books in different stages of reading. I've got a Kindle that I use, that I have lots of stuff loaded, and I read depending on what I feel like.
Yeah, and what type of fiction spins your motor?
Again, it varies. I mean, everything from a sort of whodunit kind of thing to sci-fi to historical fiction. I think James Michener does some really good stuff. Because he really gets down and does enormous research for his books. So I've got many of his books. I like short stories as well. I've got various books of short stories, South African and others, because I like that genre from time to time. But yeah, it's again not one type. It's the same with music. Depending on my mood, it's classic, jazz, rock, pop, pretty well anything. Not too good at hip hop and things, but most of
that's an aging thing for us. Yeah, there's certain things that I just can't. Yeah, it just doesn't work. Yeah, and last question: pet hate.
People who commit to doing something knowing they're not going to.
Yeah.
Have the courage to, if you don't want to do something, say you don't want to do it, and let's talk about it. Give reasons. Don't commit to it knowing you have no intention of doing it, because that's just going to go badly.
Yeah. No, it's dishonest and disrespectful, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Awesome. Well, Guy, thank you very much for making time available to have a chat. I sincerely enjoyed the chat, and we must definitely do so again. If somebody wants to draw on your wisdom, how do they get a hold of you?
Well, I'm fortunate. My name is very unusual. If you Google me or go on LinkedIn, you'll find me easily. My website is businessfitness.biz. So that's 2 words joined together, businessfitness.biz.
Okay.
And you'll find me there. So easy.
Thank you very much, and hope to chat soon.
And Johan, thank you for your time. It's been a great hour. And look forward to chatting again soon.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm ending the broadcast.